Imagine a world where tensions between the United States and China intensify to the point that many people fear an outright conflict, one that could transcend traditional battlefields and spill over into economic warfare, cybersecurity skirmishes, and disruptions to critical supply chains. Even though an actual war may not be inevitable, the ramifications of such a confrontation would be so profound that many analysts are asking which nations might manage to remain relatively unscathed. The reality is that no country would be entirely shielded from secondary effects, like economic crises, mass migration, or global political upheaval. But some states might avoid becoming direct theaters of war or frontline participants. Over time, certain factors have emerged that appear to improve a nation's odds of evading the worst consequences of a clash between global superpowers. Those include its neutrality policies, its geographic location, its level of internal stability, its alliance structures, and its overall defensive doctrine. Many people use the term neutrality rather loosely, but historically, it has had very specific meanings. Some nations, such as Switzerland and Austria, have constitutions or well-established legal frameworks that enshrine a formal policy of neutrality. Other countries have practiced a broader form of non-alignment, particularly during the Cold War, aiming to remain outside the rival blocs. A genuine stance of neutrality, however, is more than a legal formality. States that have tried to remain neutral in major conflicts often had to prove they were serious about it, sometimes by adopting robust, purely defensive military capabilities designed to dissuade any aggressor, or by showing that they offer no special advantage to any belligerent. Today, the challenge to this traditional neutrality is that modern conflict extends beyond troop movements and airstrikes to include global supply chains, financial networks, and cyberspace. Countries perceived to be leaning toward one side, perhaps by complying with sanctions, sharing intelligence data, or letting their territory be used in some strategic capacity, could find themselves targeted in a world where lines are no longer drawn solely by artillery placements. That means the old-fashioned neutrality model, which once shielded some states in 2 world wars, might not be as fail-safe in a scenario where governments wage war with economic pressure, hacking, or space-based technology. Besides neutrality, many analysts point to geography as a significant advantage. Historically, distance and difficult terrain have acted as barriers to invasion. Switzerland's mountainous terrain discouraged potential aggressors, while islands like Ireland have sometimes been spared direct involvement purely by virtue of their location. In a hypothetical US-China conflict, countries situated far from the Indo-Pacific region or beyond the North Atlantic sphere might be less likely to face direct attacks. Places like New Zealand, Chile, or Argentina appear, at first glance, to be located well away from any main theaters of war. Yet no country is immune to long-distance missile technology, to cyber attacks that recognize no borders, or to maritime blockades that can disrupt vital goods. Distance remains an obstacle to certain forms of military aggression, but in an era of long-range precision weaponry and integrated global markets, physical separation provides only partial protection. Alliances are another key piece of the puzzle. When states are part of major defensive pacts, think of NATO or bilateral US treaties with countries in Asia, those connections may increase the odds they will be drawn into a conflict. By the same token, opting out of any major alliance system could reduce that risk. But a country that is not aligned with a powerful partner may still be vulnerable to intense diplomatic and economic pressure if either superpower wants to ensure exclusive access to a strategic resource, a key port, or some form of political backing. In fact, the states that are uncommitted to either side could find themselves confronted with a different kind of threat: the danger of having to concede more and more to outside demands just to maintain their chosen path of neutrality. Internal cohesion and stability shape how resilient a country is under the strain of global turmoil. Nations with robust institutions, low corruption, well-managed economies, and a high degree of social unity are better positioned to absorb shocks, whether economic or informational. By contrast, those that are weakened by deep political rifts or by a fragile economy might be more susceptible to outside influence or internal unrest if a major war upends global trade or unleashes sophisticated disinformation campaigns. In a widespread conflict, the consequences are rarely confined to the front lines. The ripple effects of collapsed export markets, restricted shipping routes, and digital sabotage can spread in unpredictable ways, placing additional stress on countries already grappling with internal tensions. The type of defensive posture a country adopts also plays a substantial role in whether it can truly avoid entanglement. Some states maintain purely territorial defense forces with limited or no ability to project military power abroad. Others, even if officially neutral, have advanced air or naval capabilities that might tempt one side or another to secure an alliance or to preemptively neutralize those forces. A small, defensively oriented military suggests that a state is unlikely to join or effect offensive operations, potentially lowering its appeal as a key partner in a conflict. Still, a bare-bones defense might open the door to coercion if a state is seen as an easy target to pressure or co-opt. In weighing which nations might stand the best chance of avoiding direct involvement in a hypothetical US-China conflict, observers frequently mention long-neutral countries in Europe like Switzerland and, to a lesser degree, Austria and Ireland, even though these nations are geographically embedded in a broader European security framework that may or may not remain stable. Others highlight geographically distant states such as New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, or small island nations in the Pacific and Caribbean. Some point to places like Botswana or Uruguay, which have relative stability in their regions and a tradition of non-alignment. Yet none of these can fully escape the global nature of modern hostilities, especially when so much depends on trade routes and international connectivity. New Zealand, for example, is far removed from most conflict zones, but is also economically reliant on seaborne commerce that could be disrupted by naval blockades. Switzerland's formidable terrain and long-standing neutrality have offered protection in the past, but its sophisticated financial sector is deeply intertwined with international markets. And while Austria's neutrality is constitutionally established, it also belongs to the European Union, where collective decisions on security and sanctions may complicate any neutral stance. History offers illustrations of how careful diplomacy, a degree of military preparedness, and a favorable geographic position have occasionally enabled smaller countries to stay out of major wars. Switzerland's mobilization during World War II, Sweden's policy of armed neutrality, or Sweden's and Switzerland's complex economic ties to belligerent powers are instructive examples. Yet the lessons from the early and mid-20th century cannot simply be replicated in a world marked by near-instant digital attacks, globally entangled supply chains, and the omnipresent risk that any serious conflict among nuclear-armed states could escalate quickly. Predicting how the future might unfold is fraught with uncertainty. Rapid technological advances, shifts in political leadership, and potential strategic miscalculations could reshape any calculation of which places are safer. There is also the chance of a so-called black swan event, an unforeseeable development that dramatically reshuffles the geopolitical deck. Still, if there is any consensus among experts, it is that the countries most likely to avoid the devastation of a hypothetical US-China confrontation would be those combining a clear stance of neutrality or non-alignment, significant geographic distance or defensive terrain, no formal membership in the dominant military blocs, relatively high levels of internal stability, and strictly defensive military doctrines. By that metric, nations like Switzerland, Ireland, and New Zealand often rank highly, and some analysts also emphasize potential havens in South America or parts of Africa that could maintain non-aligned positions. However, none of these are absolutely insulated. Economic pressure, global financial strain, and other indirect effects of a large-scale conflict would ripple across borders, affecting supply chains, trade relationships, and digital infrastructure in unforeseen ways. In the end, while certain states may succeed in remaining outside the direct line of fire, the interwoven reality of modern geopolitics suggests that a war between superpowers would have repercussions for every corner of the planet. Even those nations that might avoid a ground invasion or missile strikes would still need to safeguard themselves against an onslaught of financial shocks, cyber disruptions, refugee crises, and complex diplomatic pressures. That is why building resilient institutions, diversifying economic ties, and preparing for a wide spectrum of possible disruptions have become essential strategies for any state seeking to preserve its sovereignty and stability in a tense international environment.